Simulant was set in the not-too-distant future where humans coexist with android robots called simulants. They have been created for various purposes and equipped with artificial intelligence, but eventually the level of artificial intelligence increases and even becomes disruptive to humans. Simulant, or SIM, was an intelligent android robot created by a technology company called Nexera for various needs and purposes. So far, the creation of simulants have progressed to the 7th generation. In the first 3 generations, simulants functioned as robot workers or helpers, and since the 4th generation, the simulant has become increasingly human-like. Even in the next generation, especially in the 6th and 7th generations, simulants were increasingly human and unique and could be implanted with the memories or behavior of their owners. Scientists realized that if the simulant's intelligence was not limited, they would become increasingly intelligent and a threat to humans. So Nexera embedded 4 security protocol codes into the simulant's intelligence system to modify their behavior, including that the simulants were not allowed to hurt anyone, either fellow humans or fellow robots. The 2nd simulant was forbidden to fight the law, the 3rd was not allowed to modify the system to improve its abilities, and the last simulant was obliged to obey all orders from its employer. The scene then showed a couple called Evan and Faye, accompanied by a robot maid called Lisa, on their way to their holiday home. But they had an accident on the way. One morning, over breakfast, Evan told Faye that he had dreamed about the accident they had had last night. It had happened many times before that Evan had dreamed about it, but could not remember what happened. Faye said it was in the past and didn't want to talk about it. The scene shifted to a man called Kessler. He was a police officer from a special department called AICE, which was tasked with dealing with artificial intelligence. Although safety protocols had been added to the intelligence system, it did not mean that there were no problems. The robots sometimes behaved erratically, which brought them into conflict with the law. Kessler was tasked with finding the whereabouts of a female simulant called Esmé. Esmé was supposed to have been deactivated 3 years ago. However, the robot was still roaming around and moving independently without an employer. One of the requirements for owning a simulant was to keep an eye on it. The owner could be prosecuted for negligence if the simulant roams free without an employer. Kessler went to a rented house, supposedly where Esmé was hiding, and knocked on a door. When Esmé came out, Kessler used an identification device to stop her movements. However, Esmé turned out to be powerful. As he was about to install a simulant control device, Esmé grabbed Kessler's arm and struck him. Esmé jumped from the 4th floor and ran away. Kessler gave chase, then picked up an IMP weapon and fired it in the middle of the street. Immediately, all the simulants within the IMP's blast radius became silent and motionless. But the simulant owners in the area did not have to worry. They were only offline for a while, and eventually Kessler found Esmé at the end of the road and brought her back to the office. Recently, Nexera launched its 7th generation of simulants during simulant trials. The embedded artificial intelligence system in this generation allowed simulants to become more human and unique. Of course, this raises the issue of pros and cons in society. The more sophisticated the simulant, the more difficult it was to distinguish it from a human being. The next day, Evan had another dream about the same accident. He tried to ignore it by playing the piano. Evan used to be a piano player, but somehow he had trouble when he tried to play. When Kessler went to Esmé's flat, he searched her room to find evidence of what had caused her to be aggressive. The landlord admitted that she did not know Esmé was a stimulant. After apprehending a simulant, he crossed paths with her neighbor, Casey Rosen. Casey admitted that he had been friends with Esmé for a long time, but Esmé had been a simulant all along. Esmé showed no signs of alienation. Back at the office, Kessler reported to his superiors that Esmé had resisted his arrest. It was something robots rarely did to humans. In his room, he also found Esmé's diary, which contained outpourings of her heart and sketches of a man's drawings. Esmé showed a level of consciousness he had never seen before. In the lab, a simulant researcher, Ying, found an anomaly while analyzing Esmé's intelligence processor. Someone had deliberately hacked the system, removing security protocols and giving her intelligence full authority. With these changes, her intelligence was fully functional, with increased abilities and even a human-like will. This was why Esmé resisted when she was about to be captured. Esmé had a special relationship with Casey when her memory files were opened. Kessler suspected that Casey knew something about Esmé. He then asked Ying to contact Nexera to see if she had worked there. That night, Kessler went to Casey's apartment, but it turned out that Casey had moved out. This made Kessler even more suspicious of Casey, as if he already had a hunch that the police were investigating him. Then Kessler found a rare book that no one could own. Then he visited the only antiquarian bookshop in town. Kessler asked the shopkeeper if he remembered the person who had bought the book, then showed him a sketch of his face. The clerk said his name was Casey Rosen, but Desmond, and by chance, Desmond suddenly appeared but immediately ran away when he saw Kessler. The next day, Evan again dreamed of the tragedy of the accident that had befallen him. But no matter how hard Evan tried, he could never remember what happened after the accident. Faye, who felt sorry for him, explained that Evan was a simulant created to resemble Evan and live in his memory. Evan was in a coma after the accident, but died shortly afterwards. However, Evan's simulant did not believe that he felt he was the real Evan. His consciousness told him that he was a human, not a robot. Faye then showed him the contents of her secret room where she kept the robot version of them. It was common for the rich in this era to have robot simulants, which aimed to capture all the memories they live into the simulant's memory. Even when Evan was in a coma, Faye was still transferring the rest of his memories into his artificial body in the hope that she could activate one of the simulants as a replacement if one of them died. He didn't remember what happened after the accident because Evan's memories were implanted in her up until the accident. But no matter how similar Evan's sim was, he was a robot who could only store memories, not process them like a human. Shortly afterwards, Faye was visited by a guest who turned out to be Casey, aka Desmond. Faye asked Casey to check Evan's memory. All memories of the accident had been erased, but they seemed to be imprinted on him. Then Faye asked if Evan's simulant could be deactivated because he had failed to live up to her expectations of being her husband's replacement. Casey could have deactivated Evan's simulant, but the memories stored in his brain would eventually fade and be erased. It would be better to leave it active. However, if Faye did not want to be bothered by his presence in this house, Casey suggested that he rent an apartment. There was an empty room in the flat Casey lived in, and he was willing to look after him for a while. Meanwhile, in his office, the CEO of Nexera told that Desmond was a technician in the Artificial Intelligence Development Division. Desmond was a genius. However, Desmond had resigned due to a difference of opinion on how to deal with simulants. He felt that the more sophisticated the simulants became, the harder it would be to distinguish them from humans as they became more humanized and conscious. At the same time, they were machines designed to serve humans. It would give the impression that they were Buddha instead. Desmond wanted to limit their abilities by forbidding the robots to reach a level of consciousness that equates them with their species, but this was contradicted by the fact that Desmond was suspected of being the one who removed the restrictions on Esmé, allowing the simulant to develop consciousness and even feelings. Later that evening, Faye packed up all of Evan's clothes. Faye finally accepted Casey's advice and would rent an apartment for him. When she arrived at the flat the next day, Evan begged her not to leave him alone because he was the memory of her husband. But Faye had no choice. She had to do it rather than deactivate it. When she got home, Faye felt lonely again, but her heart was relatively calm because she no longer saw her late husband's shadow. Later that day, Casey went to see Evan, but Evan didn't want to be disturbed. Casey said he already knew why he was there. Evan had been deliberately dumped because Faye couldn't bear to deactivate him. But Casey helped him get Faye back and then asked Evan to call her anytime if he was interested. Meanwhile, back at the office, Kessler checked the CCTV footage to find the vehicle Casey had used, but Casey had used a fake number plate so no one could trace her. Kessler asked the computer to record the car's characteristics so that if it was discovered one day, Kessler could find out where it was. Then, at Evan's apartment, Lisa delivered Faye's favorite piano. Faye had deliberately given it to Evan so that he would not be bored and so that he could practice his skills. The next day, Kessler met Esmé and asked her why she wouldn't tell him where Desmond was hiding. Was Esmé deliberately lying to protect him? Esmé said she didn't know where Casey was hiding, but admitted she would do anything to protect him because Casey was her first love. Kessler returned Esmé's diary. He refused to believe that a machine could develop human feelings. However, Esmé's behavior seemed to prove that it could happen. Then, in his apartment, Evan kept reminding of his past. The memories appeared randomly when Evan daydreamed, something that happens naturally to humans. He then went to the place where he had the accident and thought about how he was just a machine. The next day, Evan met Casey and asked if he could help him. Casey said that the latest generation of simulants like himself had an intelligence system that could improve their abilities independently. Unfortunately, they were limited by strict protocols that prevent them from acting outside the boundaries. Casey would help him remove the protocol and then reprogram him to be more human and develop his consciousness. The reason Casey suggested that Faye take him to this place was part of her scenario because he wanted to help Evan get what was rightfully his. Casey argued that simulants should be treated as human beings and not just machines to be ordered around as he had done with Esmé. With the protocol removed, Esmé was able to develop emotions and will like a human. Casey then hacked into Evan's mind process. He removed all the restrictions placed on him and rebooted his system. Once active again, Evan felt little difference. Casey told him that humans evolved by seeing and learning like him. His intelligence had to be trained, and eventually any feelings or wills would be entirely his own. Evan was free to decide what he wanted to do like a human, free to choose his path in life, and now no one could control him but himself. That night, Casey took Evan to a nightclub to have some fun and meet a lot of people. Casey was unaware that CCTV cameras were monitoring his movements. As well as identifying Casey, the computer also detected a suspected breach of the law, namely that a simulant called Evan had left without his real owner, as the law prohibited simulants from going too far away from their employers. Kessler was suspicious and contacted Faye to confirm. Unfortunately, she was out, so Kessler left a message for Faye to call him back. Shortly afterwards, CCTV captured a female simulant on the same street. The simulant could be an Esmé clone, as Esmé was still being held at headquarters. Casey deliberately went to the nightclub to meet Esmé's clone. They were both planning something big. Casey said all the preparations were complete. Then, in the middle of the night, they came to the Nexera car park, kidnapped one of the scientists, and took him away. The scientist's name was Satis, the head of Nexera's network security. Casey forced him to give full authorization to the security network. Once he had it, Casey planted a patch or update in the Nexera operating system. His intention was to hack the entire network connected to the 6th and 7th generation simulants. The update would be completed within the next 3 days. For their safety, Casey asked Esmé's clone to hide the man somewhere while he returned to the apartment with Evan. The next day, Kessler was tipped off by CCTV footage showing where Casey's vehicle had gone. After successfully tracking it, Kessler and his men arrived at the location. Realizing she was surrounded by police, Esmé's clone ran from the hideout. Kessler then fired an IMP weapon, instantly incapacitating her.
Please stay inside and remain calm.
They then searched the area for Casey's whereabouts, but it appeared that Casey was not there. Then they found an unidentified man in a dying state who was none other than Satis. Arriving at headquarters, Kessler met Esmé with her clone. He asked Esmé to persuade him to tell him their secret plan and the identity of the dying man they were holding hostage. Ying had tried to decipher his memory data. However, it was ideally encrypted and only Casey could open it. Unfortunately, Esmé knew nothing about her clone. The clone said they were preparing something great for the sake of will and freedom. The clone said they were preparing something great for choice and freedom. Then she stood up, triggered the robot stop device around his neck, and collapsed. This case appeared to be a potential threat to national security. Then Kessler was asked to investigate further to find Casey and dig up any information on Esmé. But if the simulant did not provide any information, it was better for Esmé to be resettled. Faye asked Evan not to walk around alone. Evan said he met Casey by chance and drove her there. During his stay in the flat, Evan tried new things and his speech changed. His behavior was so fluid, as if to show that he was human. His behavior reminded Faye of her late husband. Even when Evan showed her how to play the piano, Faye was amazed. What Evan was doing made Faye complacent. The robot was perfect. Faye felt like Evan was back in her life. But as their relationship grew closer, Faye realized that it was not how it should have been. After all, Simulant Evan was a robot and would never be able to replace her husband. Then Evan asked what he had to do to get Faye to accept him and let him stay. Faye didn't know how to answer, as she was learning to move on from the past. In the evening, Faye met a man called Derek. Derek was the owner of the gallery where Faye showed her paintings. They had been good friends for a long time, and after Evan's death, Derek had become her confidant. After the event, Derek drove Faye home, but unexpectedly, Evan arrived with a flower. Faye asked Derek to go home first as she wanted to sort things out with her robot husband. Evan begged Faye to take him back, as he was her husband after all, but Faye refused. To her, Evan was dead. He was only a memory of life and the image of her late husband. Though perfect, it did not mean that he could replace her husband's role. As if he could not accept her rejection, Evan became angry and then left. Faye had not expected an android robot to vent anger or disobey its employer. The next day, Faye reported Evan's unusual behavior to Kessler. Evan was fine at first, but his behavior had changed since Casey arrived and moved into an apartment with him. Hearing this, Kessler asked for the address where Casey was staying. He was a fugitive being sought by the police, so they rushed there, but they left Esmé alone. Esmé took Yin's phone and sent a message to Casey that the police were on their way to her apartment. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Casey monitored the progress of the update, which would be completed in the next 18 hours. When he received a warning message from Esmé, Casey panicked and then hurriedly packed his things, not forgetting to go to Evan's room and ask him to come with him because the police were coming to arrest them, but Evan refused. He didn't care about his current problems, he only thought about Faye and thought about how to get Faye to accept him back. Then Casey said that Evan seemed to misinterpret the freedom he had given him. There was a process to getting human attention. Faye was a human while Evan was just a robot who was born destined to have no one. But precisely with the will and intelligence he had, Evan became perfect and even made him equal to humans. Casey promised to help him get Faye, but for now they had better hurry before the police fired the INP gun that would kill him. Inside, Kessler found that Casey had left the apartment, except for the computer, which he could not save. Kessler received a report that Esmé had used Ying's mobile phone to warn Casey. Esmé once said that she would do anything to protect Casey because Casey taught her how to be better. Kessler was tired of this nonsense. He thought machines were machines and could never have feelings. Then he asked Ying to erase all of Esmé's memories and put her back. Meanwhile, Casey and Evan hid in a remote cottage owned by Faye after Evan borrowed the key. Shortly afterwards, Kessler called Faye to ask if the robot had returned home. Faye told him that Evan had gone to her cabin with Casey. Later, at the cottage, Evan asked what exactly Casey was doing being chased by the police. Casey explained that his primary mission was the freedom of simulants. He believed that simulants were entitled to equality with humans. They were designed to be like humans, even able to increase their consciousness. But that did not mean that humans can treat simulants as they please, as happened to him. Evan suffered because he had human memories he shouldn't have. At the same time, someone responsible for those feelings ignored them and then discarded them. 3 days ago, Casey managed to hack into Nexira's security network. Then he uploaded a patch or update to the central server. Since the 6th generation, Nexira has connected simulants online to make them easier to monitor. But it also made them easier to hack, then deleted all the restriction protocols implanted in the simulants online. And within the next 5 hours, all the simulants would have free will, just like Esmé or Evan. Meanwhile, Ying has opened Casey's computer access in the apartment. She discovers that Casey has been collecting data on simulants worldwide, accessing the server and hacking the system. Ying asked Kessler to find Casey immediately, as only Casey could stop the reform. When they arrive, Casey greeted Kessler, who points a gun at Casey to surrender. Casey then said that it was too late to stop it, and that the update would soon be complete, infecting the global network. Kessler and Casey then struggled for weapons. They were both shot, but Casey did not bleed like Kessler. Casey released a white fluid indicating that he was not human, but an android robot. As Kessler was about to paralyze him, Evan hit him. Realizing he could not do much, Kessler ran off, followed by Evan. Arriving in a building, Evan said that no matter how low he was in the eyes of humans, he would help Kessler if he wanted help, but would he still consider him a simulant if he tried to help him? Kessler said nothing and crawled out. Unfortunately, Kessler's bleeding was too severe for him to survive and he died. Seeing that Casey was also injured, Evan asked what he could do for him. Casey said nothing. His work was done. The simulants were seen leaving the house, abandoning their employers. They refused even when ordered or deactivated, meaning the hack was successful and all the simulants were free. Casey then told Evan that he needn't worry. Casey had a human colleague who would be visiting him soon. This person was the genius scientist who created him, who turned out to be the human version of Casey, Desmond. Desmond was a former Nexira engineer and the first human to give freedom to a robot, arguing that the simulant deserved equality with humans. Desmond congratulated Casey on a job well done. Casey smiled, but soon deactivated himself in peace. That night, Evan returned home. Evan quietly entered the pool to meet Faye. Faye asked why Evan had come to that place. Evan said he missed her a lot. Faye tried to reach for the button behind Evan's ear to turn it off, but Evan reacted quickly and drowned Faye. What Evan did showed that he could be crueler than humans. Evan went to the room where Faye kept the robot version and activated it. The android surely has Faye's memories from her life. Evan wanted to make it his life companion. They would understand each other as fellow simulants and then live happily together. The scene moved to an auction where the previously reset Esmé was sold to the public. Someone bought her at a very high price, which turned out to be at the behest of Desmond. This indirectly repeated her introduction. Esmé, of course, does not know Desmond, but it did not bother Desmond because for once Desmond would remove his restriction protocol and then start their love story for the second time. After the hacking incident, the police put Desmond on the run. He was responsible for the simulant's defiance and the death of Special Agent Kessler. To the end of his life, Kessler never believed that robots could have feelings after his simulant accidentally killed his son. On the other hand, this hacking incident was also seen as mankind's most significant failure in the use of artificial intelligence and forced the company to withdraw the simulant from sale, and the film was finally ended. So, what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below, and if you like the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you in the next video.